got to appreciate Greg Sankey occasionally, and today would be one of those days. It was very nice of him to get this rather large question about future SEC schedules out of the way before the conference embarks on the 2025 schedule. And so that brings the scoreboard in this battle for college football supremacy between the SEC and the Big Ten, the red states versus the blue states. If you'd like, the current score, SEC 9, Big Ten 0. And the 9 stands for the number of games the SEC will play in conference play starting in 2026. And the 0 under the Big Ten stands for excuses. The Big Ten has no more excuses about the imbalance in scheduling or number of conference games that each league plays. Hey, everyone, I'm Kevin Skarbinski. This is ScarboKnows. We're going to dive into this subject today. A lot of talking points to address. We're going to look at the winners and the losers. Who should Auburn and Alabama play in this newfangled 9-game schedule starting next year? Who should they play every year? Who should be their permanent opponents? We're going to dive into that, and we're going to have some fun as we are 1 week away from SEC football kicking off. Hey, let's say thank you to our sponsor, Money Management Services, right here in Birmingham, Alabama, but they're available throughout the SEC footprint. If you want to reach out to the Rice family, they are a family-owned, fee-only financial services company, and they will treat you right. So check out the hashtag there, or the QR code, I should say. Give them a shout. You'll be glad you did. So let's get into it. This bombshell announcement, in many ways, coming yesterday from Greg Sankey and the SEC office, that starting in 2026, SEC schools will play 9 conference games in football every single year. Let's look at some of the details on how this is going to work. Each school will play 3 annual opponents focused on maintaining many traditional rivalries. So your favorite school in the SEC, Alabama, Auburn, Florida, Georgia, Texas, Texas A&M, they're going to play 3 opponents every year. 1 year home, 1 year away, unless it's Texas, Oklahoma at the Cotton Bowl or Florida, Georgia in Jacksonville. You're going to play those 3 schools every year. And then your other 9 conference games will be made up of 6 schools around the league. But here's the best part of this. This is where they finally got it right. They're going to rotate those 6 games, and it works out perfectly. So 1 year you're going to play 6 schools. The next year you're going to play 6 different schools beyond your 3 permanent opponents. And then you will rotate home and away. So each team, this is the part I really love, will face every other SEC program at least once every 2 years, and every other SEC program home and away in 4 years. Now, why is this important? Well, look, as conferences expand, you lose that sense of camaraderie that being in the same conference used to bring when you had a 10-team SEC, as we did forever, or even when you went to a 12-team SEC. I mean, look at some of the egregious oversights through the years in SEC football scheduling. We can go back, all the way back to the early 80s. One of the iconic figures in SEC football, one of the greatest players the league has ever seen, Herschel Walker at Georgia. He played 3 years for the Bulldogs before turning pro. You know how many times Auburn had to play Georgia with Herschel Walker at tailback? 1, 2, 3. 3 times every year. You know how many times Alabama had to play Georgia with Herschel Walker at tailback? 0. Not once. Not one time did Bear Bryant, at the end of his career with the Crimson Tide, have to devise a defense to try to slow down Herschel Walker. That's absurd, but that absurdity has continued through the years. The most egregious recent example is Texas A&M joined the SEC for the 2012 football season. And they made a memorable debut. Johnny Manziel won the Heisman. They beat Alabama in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Didn't deter Alabama from going on and winning its second straight national championship. But that was one of those iconic games in recent SEC history. But Georgia, which has become what is trying to become what Alabama was for so long under Nick Saban, Georgia has yet to travel to College Station, Texas, to play the Aggies in Kyle Field since A&M joined the league in 2012. That is absurd. That's wrong. That takes away from what a conference is supposed to be. If you don't see the other teams in the conference very often, well, this new 9-game schedule does away with that absurdity. It corrects the mistake that the SEC has made in setting its schedules through the years. Now, if you play 4 years on an SEC football team, you will play every single team in the league home and away at least one time, at least one rotation. And that will, again, make the SEC feel more like a conference. It will make it feel more like these teams actually belong to the same organization, that they don't just see each other's names in the standings, but they actually travel to those stadiums. Those teams travel to their stadium. And fans, this is one of the great things for college football fans, especially SEC fans, they get to see more teams from around the league than they have seen ever before. So that leads us to the big question. If it's going to be a 3-6 split, 3 annual opponents and then 6 rotating opponents, who are the 3 permanent opponents going to be for your favorite school? Now, I have thoughts, as you might imagine. I call them the should-be 3. This seems to be a no-brainer. And I think it's easier for Alabama and Auburn than it's going to be for some other schools in the league, maybe a Missouri, a South Carolina, a Vanderbilt. They don't have the history. They don't have the history of success, first of all, in the SEC that Alabama and Auburn do. And did you hear the news the other day? You did if you watched this podcast on Tuesday or in the intervening days. Auburn has now won 9 national championships. They have claimed 9. They've already put the signage up in Jordan-Hare Stadium. They're wasting no time in honoring those teams. But the history of Alabama, of course, we know. The history of Auburn, we know. If you live in this state, if you follow those programs, you're well aware. So they each have 2 rivals that they should play every year, and they have played every year for a long, long time. And for Alabama, of course, it's Auburn, and Auburn, it starts with Alabama. The Iron Bowl, that's a no-brainer. That will continue. Then Alabama, the 3rd Saturday in October, the Tennessee game. Old-time Alabama fans, old-school Alabama fans will tell you that that game, to a lot of them, is more important than the Auburn game. I never bought that. Maybe it was true in the 40s or the 50s before Suge Jordan got to Auburn, maybe in the 60s. I don't know. But I've never believed, certainly in the modern era of SEC football that started in 1992 when they began the SEC championship game, that Tennessee was more important to Alabama than Auburn. Yeah, they smoked cigars when they beat the Vols. That's a nice tradition. But Tennessee for a long, long time wasn't even competitive with Alabama. And Auburn has been far more competitive over the last 20, 30 years with Alabama than Tennessee has. But that still is a traditional game. So you want to see Alabama, Tennessee every year. And on the flip side, the Deep South's oldest rivalry, Auburn, Georgia, we want to see that every year. We do see it every year. I just mentioned Auburn had to play Herschel Walker all 3 of his seasons in Athens because that was an annual rivalry for both schools. So that will continue. So who's number 3 for each school? And this is where the great debates are going to happen. They're going to happen in public. They're going to happen on podcasts, in newspaper columns like the one I write for the Birmingham News. You can find it on al.com twice a week. You're going to find it on radio shows, television shows. This debate's also going to happen behind the scenes between athletic directors, football coaches, etc. Who should that third team be for the Crimson Tide? Now, some Alabama fans will say it should be Mississippi State because Alabama's played Mississippi State more often than anyone else in the conference. But the disparity between Alabama and Mississippi State is so vast, and traditionally has been, that would give them an easier third game if they go that way. But the game that the fans want to see, the game that's going to draw eyeballs to television sets, is Alabama LSU. That is one of the best, most competitive, most compelling rivalries that we've seen in the conference in the modern era. We can't lose that every year. That has to continue, if you ask me. And they haven't and they won't, but I'm going to share my opinion anyway. And then the third annual rival for Auburn should be Florida. Now, if you are relatively young or a newcomer to this part of the country or the SEC in general, you may not realize that Auburn and Florida for a long, long time were annual rivals. In fact, they started playing in, I'm going to check my numbers here, 1912. They played every single year from 1945 through 2002. Ron Zook was the coach at Florida that year. We had an interesting conversation with him on the Die Hard podcast on the Auburn 24/7 Sports Network on Sidelines Live the other day. 1945 to 2002, Auburn and Florida played every year. Gainesville, Auburn. It was a great game. Look at the series record. Auburn has won 43 of those games. Florida's won 39 times, and they've tied twice. But since 2002, you know how many times they've played? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times in the last 23 years. And if you were in Jordan-Hare Stadium in 1993, when Terry Bowden and the Tigers won a shootout with Steve Spurrier and the Gators, or you were there the next year in the Swamp when the real shocker, when Auburn and the Tigers went to Gainesville and beat Spurrier and the Gators again. Beat them the first 2 times that Bowden encountered Spurrier as the Auburn and Florida coaches. Great games, compelling games, games that went down to the wire. Kerwin Bell, a few years later, came off out of, they didn't have medical tents on sidelines then. He seemed to walk out of the emergency room limping badly to lead a game-winning touchdown drive and throw a game-winning touchdown pass for Florida to beat Auburn. The 1983 Auburn-Florida game, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but that game was perhaps the most, 1985. I'm getting it wrong. 1985, Bo Jackson's senior year, the year he wins the Heisman, it was 14-10 Florida beat Auburn in Jordan-Hare Stadium. The most physical college football game I have ever witnessed in person. My jaw hurts. My teeth hurt just thinking about the blows that were landed in that game. And the Florida defense was so good and so physical, they knocked Bo Jackson out of the game. Some people thought they knocked him out of the Heisman race, but fortunately for Bo, that wasn't the case. He came back and bounced back strong. But that game has to be played every year, okay? We've got to have Auburn, Florida. We got to have Auburn, Georgia. We got to have Auburn, Alabama. We got to have Alabama, Tennessee. We got to have Alabama, LSU. But this is going to have everyone around the conference, coaches in particular, on the edge of their seats until they announce who those 3 permanent opponents are going to be. Can't wait to find out how that lands. Now, there is a kicker to this new 9-game SEC schedule that starts, again, next year. And here it is. And this is what separates the SEC from the Big Ten and everyone else. This settles all arguments about strength of schedule going forward. unless the Big Ten follows suit. And here it is. This is from the August 21st, 2025 SEC news release announcing the new 9-game schedules starting next year. It says SEC teams are required, I added the capitalization, are required to schedule at least one additional high-quality non-conference game from the Atlantic Coast, Big Ten, or Big 12 conferences, or Notre Dame each season. So that means that every SEC team will play 10 power conference opponents each year. Now, it is not a coincidence that the SEC announced this move to a 9-game schedule shortly after the college football playoff announced that it is restructuring some of the data it's going to use in determining its rankings that decide the teams that get in the playoff, which is 12 teams for one more year, probably not many more. They're going to restructure strength of schedule. They're going to add a strength of record metric. Now, because they don't have the transparency that the NCAA Division I Men's Basketball Committee has, in which you know exactly what metrics they're using, that each member of that basketball committee has access to help them determine their at-large selections, the football committee remains far more vague, but at least they're trying to get it right in terms of strength of schedule. And the emphasis on that and the emphasis on strength of record, the impetus to schedule harder, to put together more games like we're going to see next week, that everyone is on the edge of their seat anticipating. Texas at Ohio State, Alabama at Florida State, LSU at Clemson next Saturday, and the night before, Auburn at Baylor. Those are the type of games, that's not even the complete list. Those are the highlights. Those are the type of games that make you sit down in front of your television and lock the door behind you so you can focus on games that will go a long way in deciding who plays for an SEC championship, who plays for a national championship. Those are the type of games we want to see more of. And the SEC is requiring its teams to play one of those non-conference type games going forward, in addition to adding a conference game. Now, the Big Ten doesn't do that. The Big Ten doesn't require its teams to play a non-conference game against a Power 4 opponent or Notre Dame, which Curt Cignetti is very happy about. He has taken full advantage of that as you look at Indiana's schedules going forward. They're laughable. But kudos to the SEC for keeping this requirement, because it would have been easy for them to say, okay, we're going to 9 games. The Big Ten plays 9 conference games. The Big 12 plays 9 conference games. The ACC doesn't. They're still at 8. And they probably will go to 9 in short order after the SEC announced this. But the SEC, having joined the crowd, if you will, and going to 9, they could have said, well, we're going to remove that requirement that you have to play at least one non-conference game against a Power 4 opponent. But they didn't. They kept it. And that is going to make SEC schedules more difficult than ever. It's going to make them more difficult than any schedules in the Big 10, the Big 12, or the ACC. And it is going to allow the SEC to take full advantage of these new metrics, this new way of looking at large teams in the college football playoff by the College Football Playoff Committee. There's going to be an edge, a lean toward the SEC. When you get down to it, and you get down to the last at-large spot, the last 2 or 3 at-large spots, and you played a non-conference schedule like Indiana, played last year, like it's going to play this year and for years to come, and you compare that to the non-conference schedule of an Alabama. By the way, Alabama, one of the few schools that has now, with this new requirement by the SEC, Alabama has 11, not 9, not 10, but 11 power conference opponents on its future schedules well into the 2030s. Now, that's probably going to change. There will be years where Alabama already has 2 non-conference Power 4 opponents scheduled. I suspect that Greg Byrne and company will rethink that approach now that the SEC's gone to 9, and they may dial back a little bit. But they're still going to play teams like Ohio State and Notre Dame going forward. And kudos to Greg Byrne for doing that. Those are the games people want to see. And we're going to get more of them. So, because everything has a scoreboard of a sort, we have to look at this new move by the SEC, this power move by the SEC to shut up the Curt Cignettis of the world in terms of winners and losers. Who wins with the SEC playing 9 conference games, and who loses? Well, there's a list of them. Obviously, the SEC wins for all the reasons I've been describing. They have reestablished themselves. I don't care that Ohio State won the national championship last year and Michigan won it the year before, and there was no SEC team in the national championship game for 2 straight seasons. That's a very small sample size. The SEC wins. They reestablish their dominance by this simple but powerful move. And you know who else wins? The athletics directors in the SEC. The John Cohens at Auburn, the Greg Burns at Alabama. They win, the Scott Stricklands at Florida. They win because now, more than ever, they are in search of more revenue to pump into their budgets because they have to share revenue with their athletes, about $20.5 million a year across all sports. The majority, of course, the great majority will go to football players, and that's already underway. So they're looking for more revenue streams. And ESPN, because they are now going to have a greater inventory, the SEC's television partner, they're going to have a greater inventory of attractive games to sell to advertisers. So they're going to, and we haven't seen exact numbers yet, but it's generally understood that ESPN is going to pay the SEC more. They're going to increase the amount that they pay for the rights to SEC games because of this addition of a 9th conference game. So SEC ADs are celebrating. Rivalry games are winners. You know, we want to see Texas and Texas A&M. We want to see Texas and Oklahoma. We want to see LSU and Alabama. We want to see Auburn and Florida. And now we'll get more of those. We'll have rivalries emerge that we don't even envision right now. And that's good for the game of college football. It's good for the fans of college football. Because now you will see more good on good, more big on big. For in the SEC. In-team playoff is almost a certainty now. Because recall that the Big Ten said it would not agree to a 16-team playoff with a format that included 5 conference champions and 11 at-large selections, as long as the SEC and the ACC continued to play only 8 conference games, while the Big Ten and the Big 12 are playing 9 conference games. They thought that was a distinct imbalance. Well, if you're counting teams like Purdue and Rutgers, maybe not. But technically speaking, numerically speaking, yes, there was an imbalance there. Well, that imbalance has been erased on the SEC's part. And like I said, I believe the ACC will follow suit as soon as it can figure out how how you can play 9 games with a 17-team conference. I don't think the math is mathing there. That's something the ACC will have to figure out. They're probably going to have to add a team. They may have to include ACC in that scheduling. They may have to include Notre Dame in that scheduling arrangement somehow, some way. But this would seem to accelerate the move to what is inevitably going to be a 16-team playoff. So those are the winners in the wake of the SEC making this move. What about the losers? Well, SEC haters, the Danny Cannells of the world, the Curt Cignettis of the world. I actually listed Curt Cignetti as a loser. Curt Cignetti, I imagine, is probably celebrating today. He's probably patting himself on the back and probably taking credit for helping the SEC make the decision to move to 9 conference games, because he took it was really laughable given his own scheduling philosophy to say that he was following an SEC scheduling philosophy. Apparently, he hasn't looked at the non-conference games lined up by teams like Alabama and Auburn and Florida and Tennessee, etc. And he said he was just following the SEC scheduling philosophy. Not so much. And now the SEC scheduling philosophy is to bring on the biggest, the baddest, the bestest, and more of them every year. The interesting group of losers in this discussion are the SEC coaches themselves. They do not like this. They did not want this. They may say something different for the cameras, but they were opposed to going to 9 games because they know the difficulty of playing 8 conference games. They also know if you're one of the have-nots in the SEC, take Kentucky, for example, and if you only have to play 8 SEC games, that gives you the power to schedule 4 non-conference games. Now, you're going to play Louisville every year, and that's one of the rivalry game winners, these in-state rivalries that SEC schools have out of conference: Florida, Florida State, Kentucky, Louisville, South Carolina, Clemson, Georgia, Georgia Tech. Those games will be able to continue, and those will count as the requirement of playing a Power 4 non-conference game every year. For those schools, the question becomes, will Georgia continue, in addition to playing Georgia Tech every year, will they continue to play teams like Clemson? We hope. Again, more good games, more television, more good television product, more attractive matchups for fans. But the coaches don't like it, because now, guess what this means? And this is why under the list of losers, I've put the group of 6 and the FCS. Because with the SEC playing 9 conference games going forward and adding 1 power conference non-conference opponent, that's 10 games. That leaves only 2 games to play with. That's only 2 games for 2 spots for guarantee games to play the UABs of the world, the Troys, the Samfords, the Jacksonville States, the South Alabamas, the Alabama States, the Alabama A&Ms, the teams that have been given the opportunity to go play at Auburn. South Alabama's playing in Jordan-Hare Stadium this year. Samford has played a number of games at Auburn. Alabama, of course, through their own combination of self-interest and arrogance, refuses to play any team in the state of Alabama outside of Auburn. But a lot of SEC schools play these games. But now there are fewer opportunities for those big paydays for the schools who really need the money. So it's going to hurt them going forward. And I feel for whoever becomes the new athletic director at Troy. I don't say this very often, I feel for Mark Ingram at UAB, because it's going to reduce the number of opportunities that they have to inject a large cash payment into their athletic budgets. But all in all, if you are a fan of college football, if you believe that college football is meant to be good on good, if you can't wait for next Saturday, No, let's back it up. Next Friday, when Auburn goes to Baylor. For next Saturday, when Texas travels to Ohio State. And Alabama treks down to Tallahassee to play Florida State. And LSU gets on a plane and gets off the plane and walks into Death Valley at Clemson. If those are the games that you live for, if those are the games that get your blood pumping, start popping the popcorn now. Start clearing your social calendar for 2026 now. No fall weddings until further notice. The SEC has delivered. The SEC has given the people what they want. Not the people who are coaches within the SEC necessarily, but the rest of us are turning cartwheels. The rest of us are doing snow angels in confetti because we can't wait to see the kind of games and more of them that we want to see more than we've ever seen before. So kudos to Greg Sankey. Kudos to the SEC athletic directors. Kudos to the SEC presidents and chancellors for giving the people what they want. And that's all I've got to say about that. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into ScarboKnows. I'm Kevin Skarbinski. Make sure you check out our sponsor, Money Management Services. The Rice family will treat you right. Check them out. See ya.
Since 1992, Money Management Services in Birmingham has provided individuals and business owners with trusted, fee-only financial advice. We're more than advisors, we're your financial family. From retirement planning to tax strategies and estate planning, our team builds personalized wealth management plans tailored to your life. At Money Management Services, we treat you like family, because when you walk through our doors, you become part of ours.